Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to our latest New on the NAS session, Local Control, presented by Hazen Briggs from our Operations Support Group. We hope that you'll enjoy this presentation and find it informative. Hi Gary. and learn a lot from Hazen's presentation. Thank you.
That was my grand intro. My grand intro. Gotta make an entrance. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I hope this is useful to you. This is, as we just said, a part of a continuing series of presentations on different aspects of what we do. This one will be on local control, and it's targeted for people who do not have a background on local control. So we have different people from different organizations in the group. I know two of us from OSG. Anybody from, come on in. Anybody from QCG? We've got a couple. And I know we have some PRG people. ASG, DSG. And we have some people from the executive suite upstairs. So we've got a variety of folks with different backgrounds. And each of you in your area know more about what you do than I ever will. And so as we go through this, the intent of this is to be a fairly high-level overview, not to get too deep down into the details, but just to give you who have other backgrounds a sense of what it is to be a local controller. Hey, there he is, and there's our resident pilot. So my point was, and you came in just in time, but my point was,
flawlessly.
Everything that I'm going to say is going to be an oversimplification for the purpose of making it easier for you to understand. The flip side of that is, you can say that everything I'm going to say is not precisely 100% true. So as we go along, I'm happy to answer questions, and if you have questions, you can ask them as we come to them, or you can hold them to the end. I hope to get through this in a half hour, maybe a little bit more, so we'll have lots of time for questions at the end. But if I say something that you think is not quite right, don't feel obligated to stop me and correct me. We're not aiming for 100% accuracy. There's no test at the end, so you don't have to worry about passing a test. It's just for the sake of your understanding. So if there's something that's not clear, then by all means you can stop me at that point. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I will make one request of you. A little bit about me, Hazen Briggs, Operations Support. I've been here for 9 years, 5 years in the academy teaching before that, and then prior to that I was a controller. I bounced around the southern region, several different places. So I'm coming up on 30 years. This will be my 30 years. I'll be eligible to retire. That's pretty exciting. Not that I will, but it's nice to have options. The point I'm trying to get to is, as I enter late middle age, I find that some things don't work quite the way they used to, in particularly my ears. So if you wouldn't mind, if you have a question, if you would get my attention so I can look at you, so that I can see, because when your ears don't work the way they did when you were young, understanding what somebody is saying is about half the electronics plugged into my ear and the other half lip reading. So it's important that I know who's talking and asking a question so that I can hear it and give you the answer that you're looking for. Fair enough? What else before we dive in? I think I covered everything. So let's get started. Again, local control, knowing the NAS, kind of a high-level overview. So to kind of set the stage, I want to start out with a video. And Jennifer, if you would, Alt tab over and then hit the space bar. And as I was looking for graphics to illustrate some of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I ran across this video on YouTube. It happens to be going into the Dublin airport, and you can see from the video, it's looking out the window of the cockpit of an aircraft. Could be any airport, could be the coast of Maine, it could be Southern California, it could be Southern Alabama in the middle of summer. But you can see we started out above the clouds, and this aircraft is now descending, hit and stop right there. Thank you. And for those of you that have flown, you've had that experience. You're looking around, you can see blue sky and sunshine, and clouds here and there, and all of a sudden, nothing out the window but white. You're inside of a cloud. And that's what's happening to this aircraft, lined up on the runway, using the instruments to navigate to get lined up, can't see anything. And then at some point, the words that popped up on the screen a few seconds ago, 150 feet above the ground is the decision height. That's the point where this pilot either has to see the runway to proceed, or has to climb out and go around and try again. You just saw, I wish we had backup, if I caught it 2 seconds sooner, that's my fault. You could see when the pilot first saw anything, you couldn't see the runway at all, but you could see these lights right here, these rows of lights. And I don't know what direction you come from work. If I come from Camp Creek, every morning when I drive into work, I pass those lights. You can see that row of lights right off to the right, toward the interstate as you're driving in here. Those lights are there for the pilot to help him see the runway, and they will, there's actually, the center light will actually flash, the first one, then the second one, then the third one. So it's kind of like an arrow of lights pointing toward the runway. Helps the pilot see what they're trying to see so that they can land. Now, if you look further down, you'll see some markings on the runway. Go ahead and start it up. And as the aircraft gets to the runway, you'll see the end lights and the number of the runway to make sure you're lined up with the right one. Lights in the runway, lights on the side of the runway. And as we now are on the ground and traveling down the runway, you can see, you can't see, stop it right there, this is a good spot. You can only see 500, maybe 1,000 feet down the runway in this case. If there was somebody on the other end of that runway, there's no way that this pilot would be able to see them. So that's the job of the local controller, to know information that the pilot doesn't have and to provide it to the pilot to make sure that operations on and off of the runway are safe. Now, if you were at the previous presentation on ground control, or you can watch it online if you're interested, it's posted, available to view, you'll know that the ground controller is responsible for beginning an aircraft from the ramp, from the gate, to the runway and holding short of the runway, and then the aircraft switches to the local controller. The local controller has really one central responsibility, and that's that runway right there. And the reason, to give you kind of a sense for why that position is so important, is because, as you can see, the pilot can't see. They still fly, but they do it with the assistance of the local controller and a lot of other portions of air traffic to make sure that those operations are safe. Now you can all tab back into our slide presentation, and we'll go to the next thing. To help us understand a little bit about the local controller's job, I thought I'd start going all the way back to the beginning, and this fellow's name is Archie Lee. You may have seen a news article in one of the FAA web pages a few weeks ago about this fellow. He's believed by some people to be the first air traffic controller anywhere ever. It turns out there's some debate whether it was him or whether it was somebody in Newark. It might have been there a couple weeks earlier. In any case, in the early days of aviation, there was one aircraft, and then somebody built another aircraft, and there were two, and then there were three, and then there were six. And then they were big enough that they could start carrying passengers. And St. Louis was one of the early airports that started experiencing an increase in the size of aircraft and the number of aircraft and so forth. They figured out very early on that the pilots didn't always do a good job of taking care of themselves and staying out of each other's way. Works pretty well for small aircraft and small airports, but as you get bigger and faster and more people involved, the issue of safety becomes more and more important. So the first thing they did, they went on and got Archie, and you can see Archie's initial piece of equipment there. He had a checkered flag. Those of you that are NASCAR fans, you know what a checkered flag is, right? That would be cleared to land. What color flag did they use at the start of a race?
Green.
Green? So he would have had a green flag for cleared for takeoff. That would be in the other hand there, you can't tell. So a green flag to take off and a checkered flag to land. And he would also have a red flag. If there's something going on that the pilot's not aware of, Archie would wave them off with the red flag. And he would decide if there's an aircraft wants to land, an aircraft on the ground, which one's first and which one's second. If there's a tie, somebody's got to decide who's going to go first, and that was Archie. He also had a wheelbarrow, and in his wheelbarrow he kept his lunch pail. So you can see his lunch there. He also had an umbrella, multi-purpose umbrella, good to keep off the rain when it's raining, good to keep off the sun when it's hot. So that was his office. And when the wind shifted, he would take his wheelbarrow, travel from one end of the runway down to the other, so he could be where the aircraft were landing and taking off.
Just historical note, back in the early days, they didn't have runways. They just had one big...
And that's even further back than I wanted to go.
And I think he was around at that time where, you know, they would land into the wind all the time, and he's in the middle.
Okay, so Archie's job, like I say then, is primarily to protect that runway, to make sure the aircraft landing and the aircraft taking off don't get in each other's way. And that job, the local controller job, is exactly the same today. A lot of things about the job have changed. We have technology and different sizes of airports and so forth, different types of aircraft. The job is exactly what it was when Archie started doing that, and that is keep them safe. So, when it became too much or too difficult for Archie to keep track of everything going on the airport as it got bigger, we started building towers, little short towers for little small airports. And as airports got bigger, towers got taller. And so today, with really big airports, we have really big towers, and that's what they look like on the outside. On the inside, they look like this. And so you can see there's a lot of different pieces of equipment, and there's a lot of different people in the tower doing different jobs. One of those jobs will be the local controller, and their responsibility will be just to focus on the runway. The aircraft coming in to land, the aircraft lining up to take off, to make sure that that's done in a safe way. So I'm going to tell you about some of the risks that the local controller has to watch for and deal with, and also some of the equipment that the local controller has available to facilitate them doing that job. So to begin with, there we go. What kinds of airports have towers? Not all airports have towers. Small airports can have a tower. This happens to be Cobb County, and you can see right there it says tower, and there's an indication, one runway and one little tower. Medium airports, that's Peachtree DeKalb, or DeKalb Peachtree, and then of course the big airports, Atlanta Hartsfield, all of those, maybe most of those for sure, maybe all of those would have towers. And you can see right there in the middle of where the tower is. Now if you imagine that big tall structure with the windows all the way around, and you've got runways up here, 2 runways, and you've got runways down here, 3 more runways. That's a lot for one person to watch, and so that's not the way it works. There actually will be 2 or 3 local controllers. When I worked at Memphis, there was an east runway, a west runway, and a north runway. And each of those 3 runways would have its own controller to keep track of just what's going on with that runway. And then, of course, they would coordinate with each other to make sure that there wasn't anything that one was doing that would interfere with somebody else. So you can have multiple local controllers in the tower, each one looking out toward the runways that they're responsible for. What's involved in making sure that an operation is safe? Well, one of the big things for one aircraft to take off or land safely, one of the big issues is weather. And that can be wind. There was an incident you may remember, actually a crash in Dallas a number of years ago, where an aircraft was on final and got caught in what's called a microburst. Now, it's about the time I think that they started talking about microburst, which is a strong downdraft, and the air comes down and then it goes out. So as the aircraft is flying toward that, first they have the tailwind, first they have the headwind, which is good. Aircraft like to fly into the wind, it helps them maintain their altitude. But then going from that to a downdraft, so the aircraft immediately got pushed down closer to the ground, followed by a loss of speed with the tailwind, so they didn't have enough ability to climb back up to where they were supposed to, ended up getting to the ground about a mile short of the runway, maybe more. So a lot more attention since then has been paid to the effective wind. We have more attention from controllers issuing the wind at every aircraft that lands. When the aircraft gets close to the runway, this is what the wind is, so the pilot knows what to expect. We also have a number of different pieces of equipment, one called LWAS, LLWAS, I think is the acronym, Low-Level Wind Shear Alert System. It will keep track of the wind at different locations around the airport and try to detect these rapid changes in speed or changes in direction that might indicate a microburst. And if it thinks there might be one in progress somewhere, there'll be an audible alarm, a beeping that starts going off in the tower to alert the controller. The controller then can pass that information on to the pilot so that the pilot knows to be prepared. Maybe fly a little faster, fly a little higher, whatever they can do to be prepared in the possibility that they do encounter that kind of wind. Another issue with weather would be visibility, and we saw that in the video that we started with. There'll be times when the pilot just can't see out the window. And in situations like that, the controller has a number of tools available also. There is a piece of equipment that monitors just the visibility at the runway. In the weather we saw in the video, it's quite possible that the tower can't even see out the runway. And so there are other pieces of equipment such as radar and visibility sensors so that the controller, the local controller will know what the conditions are at the runway and passes on to the pilot. Now, there are different levels of certification and different types of approaches, different weather requirements that a pilot might need to satisfy in order to be able to land in different weather conditions. So if the weather is bad, it might be that one aircraft is able to land because of the equipment and the training and so forth, and another aircraft might not. So it's important for the controller to have access to that information, to be able to pass on to the pilot exactly what the weather is. Landing gear, that's another issue, just affecting that one aircraft. I can remember a number of times in the course of my career when an aircraft was approaching the runway, and one of the main tools the controller has in the tower is a pair of binoculars. You look out, you see the aircraft lined up perfectly, everything's great, except there's no wheels sticking out the bottom of the aircraft. That could be a problem. And so we'll tell the aircraft, go around, you don't have gear, or sometimes there's equipment in the cockpit that will alarm and tell the pilot the gear is not properly deployed. And the aircraft will go around and circle for however long it takes, hopefully to resolve the problem. With smaller aircraft, they actually have a crank they can turn so that the gear comes down manually if it doesn't come down automatically. That's something that the pilot hopefully will always know, but doesn't always know. And so the controller is like a double check, a safety feature to ensure that the aircraft has those wheels. Now that would affect the aircraft landed without wheels. That would affect obviously that aircraft, but not only that aircraft, but everybody else that wants to land on that runway. Because once there's an aircraft with no gear sitting in the middle of the runway, you can imagine it's going to take some time for that aircraft to be removed. So if you go back to our first airport that only had the one runway, and that runway is now unavailable, anybody that wants to go there is not going to be able to for however long it takes to resolve it. So that's a service that the local controller provides to the aircraft to ensure that they have gear. Some other things that local controllers watch for: wildlife. Some of you may know who Bill Engvall is. Tells a story, inconvenient, tells a story of he was flying into a small place to do a show. Small aircraft, and I mean small, just him and the pilot. And they landed, and they hit a deer. And he takes his cell phone and he calls his wife and he says, "Honey, you're not going to believe what just happened. I'm on the plane, we just hit a deer." And she says, "Was it on the ground?" No, Santa was making a run. But wildlife on the airport, if you think some airports like the Atlanta airport right now, more or less surrounded by neighborhoods, but there are some trees. You might have smaller animals, but if you go back 10, 20, I don't know how long the airport has been here, this started out further out from town than it is now. You could have had deer and fox and other kinds of animals, lots of different things that might come out on the airport, and obviously that's an issue, not just other aircraft on the runway, but animals on the runway would be a big problem for an aircraft wanting to land. The most interesting wildlife story that I remember is when I was working in Louisville, there was something on the runway, and a pilot told us about it at first. We looked with our binoculars, we looked and looked. Turns out it was a turtle. And I don't mean a turtle, I mean a turtle. And so, of course, we didn't let anybody use that runway for a while. One of the controllers got together with one of the airport personnel that took his pickup truck out onto the runway, picked up the turtle, put it in the back of the pickup truck, and he had soup for about a month. Access to the But the point being, the runway is now clear and the aircraft are safe. It was definitely an airport in the South, if I can say that.
I heard it tastes like chicken.
Yeah, it tastes like
It tastes like chicken.
you murder man, you just
Now,
don't.
you don't necessarily have a problem with birds on the runway because they tend to get out of the way. But when they're flying in the air, birds fairly slow, aircraft fairly fast, there's always the potential that an aircraft will have an encounter with a bird. A lot of aircraft have run into birds and gotten broken windshields and landed safely. But when an aircraft goes into an engine, that's potentially a different story. So we watch for birds. We tell pilots about birds when they're out there. One bird story. My wife bought a little, nobody ate the bird, it's okay. You're going to need trauma leave after this, I apologize. My wife got one of these little platforms that mounts along a window ledge and put it in our kitchen, and subsequently decided to put a bird feeder on the glass right outside of that same window. So now my cats have dinner in a show. They can sit there and watch the birds eating out of the bird feeder. And the birds have gotten used to it. Over time, they just fly right up to the window, and the cat's sitting right there. The cat no longer even tries to get the bird because they know they can't. The birds have gotten used to the cat. And so they will land, and now even a squirrel has started getting up to that ledge. It's about that wide. So it's more than enough room for a squirrel, and he will eat all of the seeds. My wife hates that. She'd rather have it for the birds. The point being, animals over time get accustomed to an environment and know whether it's safe or not. That cat, those birds would never land in front of my cat on the back porch, but they'll do it right next to the kitchen window. Same cat, much closer, but they know the difference. And so when it comes to keeping birds away from airports, we've done lots of things over the years, whether it's loud booms or high-pitched noises or the sound of an eagle. We do lots of things to try to keep birds away from airplanes. Birds get accustomed to different things over time, and so we keep looking for the perfect thing that will always work. I'm not sure that there ever will be. So in the meantime, we have controllers in the tower with binoculars watching for birds and letting the pilots know. So again, at least they can watch for them and be prepared.
Time you can't open that window and it'd be a squirrel.
I'm not sure that the cat would actually win that one, but hopefully we'll never find out. People in vehicles. Obviously, there's going to be vehicles on an airport, around the runway, sometimes on the runway. Going back a number of years, it used to be the case that an airport vehicle needed to go from here to there, and there was a runway in between. They would call the ground controller, and the ground controller would coordinate with the local controller, and then across this runway, the vehicle would go across and get to the other side. Now we don't do that anymore. They will drive a long way. So they'll drive 2 or 3 miles to go around that runway rather than crossing it. If you look at Atlanta, it's a pretty busy airport. Number one, there's not a lot of opportunities to get across that runway with nothing else going on. So that's number one. But something else that used to happen, the controllers typically wear an earpiece. It's got a microphone, and people downstairs in the radar room or other facilities can call up and talk to them in that earpiece. And so as a local controller, I might be sitting in my position, and the ground controller on the other side of the cab yells over to me, "I need to cross your runway." Well, I'm listening to somebody else in my ear ask me a question, and I say approved. But I'm not talking to the local controller. I'm talking to the person in my ear. The ground controller doesn't know that, and so the ground controller gives permission to that vehicle to cross, even though something's going on. And that's happened more than once. So we've gotten as far as we can away from letting vehicles cross runways. But they'll go around. Sometimes they have to. And so that's an issue. Grass has to be mowed. So there'll be mowers. And when is there ever a time, again, Atlanta, when is there ever a time when there's not aircraft landing basically on every runway all the time? But the grass has got to be mowed. And so there'll be vehicles out there on the edge of the runways, not on the runways, not in the way of the aircraft, but close to them. The local controller will watch that, watch for vehicles, and also let the pilots know there's a vehicle out there so the pilot is not surprised. There was a case in Philadelphia a few years ago where somebody in a vehicle actually managed to get on the airport and drive around for a while. There was a case I just heard of last year down in Mobile, one of the airports down in Mobile when I was down there. The chief there told me about the person that got onto the airport and actually got a hold of an airport vehicle and drove around the airport with the airport vehicle. And just this week in Nashville, there was somebody that climbed the fence. They saw somebody climbing the fence to get onto the airport. Now, we take those things more seriously than we did a number of years ago. So in the case of Nashville, the entire airport is closed until that person is located and they know exactly what's going on with that. So again, the local controller, watch for those things. And if there's a vehicle out there, we don't know where they're going, what they're doing, you keep aircraft out of the way of that vehicle. And going back to Archie, this is something that we can see and be aware of that the pilot would not necessarily be able to. So that's the function of the local controller. And of course, we hear about these in the news all the time. Where we know about them, we hear about them. Possibly we see them, although they're pretty small for a controller to see if they're 2, 3, 4 miles away from the airport. If there's a report of a drone out there, that's something the local controller will be able to pass on to subsequent aircraft.
As we're getting more and more of these, is there air traffic now has a different way of handling drones, or are they required to dock you guys, or they pretty much staying away.
Well, there are rules just now being developed. I just got an email this week where there are areas where drones are authorized to fly 400 feet and below without any kind of, but one of the things that's happening is they're trying to identify the locations where the drones can fly that'll not be in the way, and hopefully people will go and fly there and not fly close to airports or too high or things like that. So it's
I hear there's a lot of report of those.
It's
in Ireland.
developing.
Yeah.
So those are the concerns that a local controller looks at when they're making sure it's safe for an aircraft to land, to take off. What is some of the equipment in the tower that helps the local controller do that job? Number one, binoculars, looking out the window, seeing the gear, seeing the animals, people, vehicles, debris. Radios, you know, once you have that information, the controller obviously has to relay that to the pilot. Radios have been around for almost as long as Archie and his flags. That was the next upgrade after his wheelbarrow and his umbrella, was to give him a radio so he didn't only have to wave the flag, but he could actually talk to pilots. Wind sensors, talked about the LWAS, detectors that will watch for indications of wind shear or wind changes and so forth. Another important thing that local controllers do is determine what direction the aircraft will land and take off. And it's important to them that they fly into the wind, especially when it's a strong wind. So we look at the wind sensors in order to determine those things as well.
Nathan,
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. You said they use the binoculars to see if the landing gear is down.
Yes.
If the landing gear is not down, what does that lead to potentially?
What does it lead to if they try to land?
Approach, yeah.
Oh, right. Well, if you see it in time, we'll tell the aircraft to go around, your gear appears to be up, and the pilot will circle. Sometimes they'll go out and hold somewhere. Sometimes they'll just circle if the weather's good, and they can just visually maneuver off to the side until they can figure the problem out. I've seen it take 20 minutes before they were actually ready to come in and try to land again.
Or here in London. Which is.
And sometimes, if it's a mechanical failure that they simply cannot resolve, the next thing that we do is call the fire department, who comes out and puts the foam on the runway. And so if they have to belly land with no gear, at least they have something, it's foam, so it's slipperier, and it will retard sparks. It will also help prevent a fire. Approach lights, runway lights, we saw those again from the video. They help the pilot line up with the runway. Where does the local controller fit into that? The controls for the lights are in the tower. So if the pilot is in the clouds and wants to see the runway, the pilot will say to the controller, turn the lights up. And I think the most advanced light system has 5 steps, 1 through 5, 5 being the brightest with the flashers. Turn them up to 5 so they'll shine up through the clouds so the pilot can see them, and then immediately, as soon as the pilot is down out of the clouds and can see the runway, now they're being blinded by these extremely bright lights, so then immediately turn them back down again. So that's something else that the controller does to help the pilot, number one, see the runway, and because they can't see it because of the clouds, and number two, see the runway because they're being blinded by the lights. Weather information, we have weather reports. Hourly observations are required at airports that have towers, and they'll either be made by a person or more they're being made, at least part of them, automatically by equipment that checks the visibility and keeps track of the wind and so forth. Once we have that information, we pass it on to the pilot on something called an ATIS, as well as we can talk to them on the radio, give them the current winds and so forth. There's a recorded piece of information called an ATIS that's provided to the pilots. In the old days, it used to be we would manually record those. You go over and reset the recorder, erase the old one, and then take the microphone and read. And so as a trainee, one of the things that you would always get is when it was time for you to make the ATIS, the bottom guy on the totem pole, that was your job. There would always be heckling and maybe things being thrown across the room to try to distract you and see how many times it took you to get from the beginning to the end of that 30-minute broadcast without laughing and having to start over. So we've gotten away from that now. A lot of airports have something called a digital ATIS. It's been around for at least 15 years, I think. And it originally, being older technology, had that robot voice that you associate with computers. and we would have to spell things phonetically. There were some sounds that we just could not get it to make. So it sounded approximately like the words that you were trying to convey, but it was not always clear. It's gotten much better over the years. So that information, the weather, and information about the airport, closed runways, closed taxiways, the work, all that can be communicated to the pilot in that way. A couple of pictures, examples of some of the equipment we just talked about. The low-level wind shear, you have here center field wind, and at the approach end of 13 right, 13 left, 26. So when a pilot is lining up to land at a particular runway, the controller can give the pilot the wind, not just for the airport as a whole. We got some pretty big airports, 2, 3, 4 miles across. We got the wind at the location where the aircraft is going to be when they're getting ready to land. So extremely useful. Weather radar, a lot of aircraft have, especially the air carriers, they have weather radar right in the cockpit. We also have weather radar in the tower. This is helpful for giving information to the pilots. It's also helpful for seeing what's coming. If there's weather that's 10 miles out and it's coming our way, you can kind of predict that's going to be here in 5 minutes, it's going to be here in half an hour. And that also is something pilots want to know. If they're getting ready to depart and they've only got about 5 minutes before the storm hits, that's something that we can tell them by looking at the radar. Then you put more than one aircraft into the picture, and there are some other things that we worry about. If we have a big aircraft, it's faster, it's less maneuverable. We really want to have one aircraft at a time on the runway. But if you have smaller aircraft, smaller, slower, more maneuverable, there are rules that allow the controllers to have more than one runway on the aircraft. More than one aircraft on the runway, thank you. That makes more sense. At the same time, the closest distance you could have two small aircraft would be 3,000 feet. So you look at a 12,000 foot runway over here in Atlanta. The first aircraft takes off, gets 3,000 feet down the runway and in the air. The second one starts, 3,000 feet. The next one starts, and so you could have maybe 4 aircraft over that runway at the same time legally because they're all small and maneuverable, and the rules allow it. Then when you get to multiple aircraft in the air, you have other things to worry about. And once they're in the air and off the runway, the local controller wants to make sure that they're appropriately spaced out for the next phase of their journey with the approach controller and then the center controller. Maybe those would be good topics for future discussions sometime. But just to talk about the piece of that that affects the local controller, we have a couple of different rules, sets of rules that an aircraft can fly under. Maybe you've heard of IFR and VFR. The V and VFR is for visual flight rules. Those little aircraft that are going to go one after the other, once they're in the air, they're responsible to see each other and stay out of each other's way. So one might want to go this way, the other want to go that way, another want to go another way. And they do that visually by seeing each other. It's not the controller's responsibility to maintain a certain distance between them. But IFR, instrument flight rules, that's the video that we started with where the aircraft is in the clouds and can't see anything. Got to depend on the instruments, got to depend on the controllers to keep every IFR aircraft an appropriate distance away from every other IFR aircraft. So obviously they're going to start on the ground, and you can space them by letting the first one get 3 miles away and then starting the next one, and let that one get 3 miles away. We have other rules that allow us to let them get closer than that. We can span them out. So if one's going left and then the next one goes right and the next one goes left and the next one goes right, that's the best way because then we can get them in the air a little quicker that way. And going back to ground control, one of the things the ground controller does when lining up aircraft to the runway, if that's what we're doing, he tries to get them in a sequence where one turns left and the next one. You don't want 3 going to turn left followed by 3 going to turn right. So we'll arrange them on the ground in order to get them in the air quicker. And that's something that's done between the ground controller and the local controller. So as we're getting them off the runway into the air, exactly what we're going to do is going to be based on a number of things, including are they IFR, are they VFR, where they're going. Flow control, if not only at the airport where the aircraft is departing, but maybe if an aircraft is departing Atlanta wanting to go to New York, and New York is busy because everybody wants to go to New York for some reason I'll never understand. But whatever, if people want to go to New York, there's a lot of planes that will take you there, which means it's like a traffic jam every day. And so there'll be something called flow control where an aircraft may have to wait a certain amount of time, may have to wait get a certain times to depart in order to get them in sequence with all the other aircraft wanting to go, wherever it might be. I talked about fanning them out on headings, traffic advisories for VFR aircraft where we don't have to establish certain distances between them. We will at least tell them about each other. And those are called traffic advisories. Traffic ahead to your right, traffic 12 o'clock and 5 miles, whatever it might be. I'll tell you one quick story about that. When I worked in a little VFR tower in Louisville, Kentucky, I had one aircraft, small aircraft. It was a Cessna, which is a high-wing, single-engine aircraft, doing touch and goes in the pattern, that just circling the airport, practice landing and take off, and come around and do another practice landing and take off. And coming down what's called on the downwind, getting ready to turn and line up for the runway again. Now, with the high wings, the Cessna, if you look up and to the right, you're looking at the wing. You can't really see what's up there. And while I had that one aircraft, another aircraft coming in was a Cherokee. A Cherokee single engine got low wings, so in a Cherokee, you try to look to the right and down, you're looking at the wings, so you can't see what's down here. We've got a Cherokee up high and the Cessna down low, and I tell them about each other. It's their responsibility to see each other and to work it out between them. Who's going to go first, who's going to go second. Or as a local control, I can tell them, you follow the guy that's in front of you. Well, the Cherokee didn't see the Cessna and kept coming, and they kept going, this one's going this way, this one's going that way, and they never did see each other for a long time, and finally turned, and now they're like this, and the Cherokee's on top and the Cessna's on the bottom. And so then it's the local controller's function to provide them instructions until they can see each other, keep them safely apart, and then when they see each other, then they can follow each other. Another function that the local controller provides. Wake turbulence for the big aircraft, and you probably know, traveling through the air, the wing is what causes the aircraft to stay up. If you've ever stuck your hand out the window as you're driving down the interstate, you know exactly how that works. That big wing moving through the air at that rate of speed creates something called turbulence, and the next aircraft along runs into that mixed up air. Now that turbulence will settle down and spread out and dissipate. So it takes a certain amount of time to do that. The next aircraft through there can have a bumpy ride. Some aircraft have even been flipped upside down and put into the ground because a small enough aircraft too close to a big aircraft is going to have a very difficult time maneuvering through that. So we have extra distance in specific situations. So if one aircraft departs and it's a very large aircraft, a small aircraft to follow it, the local controller will provide extra spacing for that aircraft to make sure that it's safe. Where different aircraft are in order to keep them safe from each other. ASD is a type of radar, airport surface detection equipment, that actually typically sits up on top of the tower and points down to the ground, and it sees the aircraft that are moving around on the ground. So even in our video, when the controller can't see the runway, can't see the taxiways, you have an ASD, you can see where the aircraft are and give them directions that way. CTRD is a radar display, similar to what a controller in the radar room has. It allows the controller to see aircraft in the air. And they look something like this. This is the ground radar. You can see the location of the aircraft and other information about the aircraft, the call sign, and other information, so the controller can know who they are and where they're trying to go, keep track of them that way. And that's the radar display. Now, typically in a tower, these are hanging from the ceiling, but I got this picture. It shows you also the keyboard, so not only can the controller look up here and see this aircraft here and another aircraft down here and here, but they also have the ability with the keyboard to make various entries and do things with the display. Flash air, something called a flash, where the data block blinks on somebody else's display to get their attention, so you can communicate with them even automatically through the computer, passing information back and forth to another controller. So, with all of that, remember what the controller's #1 job is, which is to make sure that that runway environment is safe from all of those things that we just talked about. Make sure that there's nothing that's going to impact the safety of that one aircraft. So what is the controller's #1 tool for doing that? That's pretty good. Pretty good. And everything that we do going all the way back to Archie is based on that. What we as local controllers can see, We can then pass on to the pilots and make decisions where they can't always have the picture that we have. Who gets to go first? Who gets to go second? Oh, there's supposed to be a question slide there. I don't know where it went. In any case, I will take questions if anybody has any. Thank you. Anything. It's too hot in here. Put us all to sleep.
So, Hayden,
Yes.
going back to Joe Penn's presentation on ground control.
Yes.
Tell me again, remind me again where ground control takes off and local control takes
Oh,
off.
okay. That's a good question, and I can actually back up to one of the airport diagrams, so I can point to that. This. There. So, the black lines, the heavy black lines are the runways. The local controller is responsible for that. These areas here in gray, those are where the aircraft park. And everything from where the parking ends, right here on the edge of the ramp, the ground controller takes over there, and they'll give the aircraft instructions, come down this taxiway, all the way to here. If this runway was where the aircraft wanted to go, the ground controller would get them to there, and they would switch to local, and local would say when it's time to turn the corner, get on the runway and take off. And then after they're in the air, maybe 500 feet, depending on what's going on, 500 feet past the end of the runway, then the local controller, if they're going to talk to radar, the departure controller would switch it to another frequency to talk to the next controller. All the way to the destination, then turn it around again. Coming in, the local controller will talk to the aircraft 2, 5, 10 miles out, depending on the situation, and all the way down the runway and exiting the runway back to the ground controller. Yes, sir.
Local and ground control operate on different frequencies, right?
That's right. Yes.
In a real small airport, would a ground controller actually, it probably would be one person doing both jobs rather than two different jobs.
That is
People,
possible.
right?
There are times when that's allowed, yes.
Would a ground controller, if it were one person, really say, okay, now switch over to such and such a frequency, and I'll talk to you on that so we can commence our local control, or?
Sometimes. Sometimes not. Now, if it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm fixing to go home and there's one aircraft out there, I'll talk to them all the way out. It may even be ground control, local control, and radar control all in one. So you can stay on that one frequency for a long time. But if it's the middle of the day and there's kind of a lull, it's busy when the aircraft come in, and then there's a lull and busy when the aircraft go out. I know right now I'm talking to 2 aircraft and it's not a problem, but 5 minutes from now, there's going to be 10 other aircraft, 5 of them on ground control and 5 on local. And so it's important at those periods where you think you might be ready to get busy to get everybody on the right frequency, so that the ground, another controller comes in and says, all right, I'll take ground, and all the local controller has to do is flip the switch. Now he's got all his aircraft, ground's got all his aircraft. So it depends on the situation. Good question.
Just to differentiate, when you're talking about VFR traffic advisories, it's participating rate only, but there's a difference between talking to an approach control and the tower when you're talking about radar advisories. If he's flying into your tower local control airspace, he's got to do what you got to say.
That's right. Yeah. But and as you get further out, like you say, subjects for another presentation talking about the different rules and different.
It's not participatory at this point. He's required to talk to you if you're telling him.
Yeah, when they're an airport with a tower will have a certain size airspace designated where the aircraft have to all talk to the tower and do what they're told, if they can. Another piece of equipment I didn't talk about is what's called a light gun. Going all the way back to the days when not every aircraft had a radio. You have a green light, a red light, and a white light. And I guess that came from Archie Slags originally. That you would be able to give signals to an aircraft on the ground, to an aircraft in the air. And those are still in the book. We still have those for an aircraft that takes off with a radio, but then the radio breaks while they're in the air. Obviously, they got to get on the ground. They can't talk to anybody. So we still even have the ability to use the light signals to give them clearance to land. Good. What else? All right, I guess we're done.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
President Steiner and Ron cluster going around